Well, hello there and welcome to my channel. I'm here still in the Philippines. We're all doing fine. I've not been terribly doing too much video lately because of a number of things, one of which is that we're actually moving house, so it's been a bit hectic getting that sorted out, but we'll fill you in a bit more details on that. As you can see, the barber is back at work, which is good, and I decided to redevelop my face fuzz, all to the good. Persuaded Sam that it wasn't as bad as she thought. And he wrote up, the reason I am making a video today is because I have been asked by several people, certainly 3 or 4, I think more actually, certainly more if you go back a year or so, to respond to a video made by a person called Natalie Wynn, whose YouTube name is ContraPoints. Now, I don't wish to sound too harsh on ContraPoints. You'll find out during the course of this video that there are things that you should note about what she is and her opinions on the world, but she seems like a decent, committed person, and I think that many of the things she says are completely wrong. I think that she comes from a standpoint which is not malicious. I don't think she's a bad person. I just think she's misled. So we're going to do this, and it's going to be a little bit tricky because I'm going to have to do some on this and then do some on this computer here, which has got soundtrack on it. So first of all, this is in response to a video that ContraPoints made late in 2018. And as I say, it's been flagged up to me a few times. I did watch it at the time and I thought, please, but apparently, people are still listening to this and they're still believing it. So we're going to have to, put the reality out there. So,
the mainstream scientific view, endorsed by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, the DSM-5, and most practicing clinicians, is that the primary reason trans people transition is to alleviate gender dysphoria.
Yeah, primary reason that people seek transition is to alleviate gender dysphoria. And this is absolutely true. However, gender dysphoria is not a uniform thing. It comes in 2 different types, and those types are homosexual and non-homosexual. Now, you'll find that during the course of her presentation, ContraPoints kind of fudges over the difference between non-homosexual and homosexual and androphilic.
The second type of trans women are the autogynephilic transsexuals. These inscrutable perverts can apparently get off just by looking in the mirror.
So, yes, it is absolutely true that the major medical and diagnostic agencies in the world recognize that the desire to transition is normally caused by gender dysphoria. However, organizations like the APA, which publish the DSM, recognize that there are 2 different types of gender dysphoria. And in the current edition, it's a rolling edition thing. They don't actually produce new editions anymore at the DSM publishers. They just amend. And the next one you buy is going to have the amendment in, and they amend online as well. So what's happening, so within the DSM, the 2 types are, in traditional language, they were homosexual and non-homosexual, and today they're called early onset stroke childhood as opposed to adolescent stroke late onset or adult. And these are an attempt partly to deflect criticism for being lack of PC-ness, but also to try and clarify the very important nature of the difference between the 2. What we will continue to call homosexual transsexuals are trans kids. They appear as, if they're boys, they appear as girls by the age of 4 or 5. And they're completely committed to that path in life. And attempts to try and divert them from it are basically abusive. So that's the 2 types.
Replace the stigmatizing terms homosexual, transsexual, and autogynephile with more neutral language. Let's say Cluster A and Cluster B. Cluster A trans women are mostly androphilic, that is, attracted to men. They transition relatively early in life and are very effeminate as children. Cluster B trans women are mostly gynephilic, attracted to women, transition relatively later in life, and have outwardly boyish childhoods.
It is true that the second type of trans women, or transitioners, are autogynephilic, but that's not how they're described in the literature. They're described as non-homosexual or adolescent late onset It comes to the same thing. What you have to understand is that autogynephilia is the cause of all non-homosexual gender dysphorias. And that's where the dividing line happens. If you use Blanchard's original criteria, then any given person can only be either homosexual or heterosexual. Sorry, homosexual or non-homosexual. Homosexual or non-homosexual. You know, it's an on-off switch. And the homosexual ones are the ones who were highly sex non-conforming as children. If they were boys, they wanted to dress as girls. They wore long hair. They wouldn't touch boys' toys. They wanted to play with their dolls. Socially, they preferred socialising with girls. They didn't like to socialise with boys. They only started liking boys after they got to puberty and they realised, they can have some fun with boys. All of that stuff. And the non-homosexual ones were basically just ordinary boys. Some of them were maybe a little bit masculine. Some of them were maybe a little bit non-masculine. They just showed the normal range of what we would expect to find in young boys. They were not differentiated, right? Whereas the homosexual group definitely was, right? And that's really, really important. That is the divide. That is the divide, and nobody has ever successfully challenged that divide. Again, ContraPoint's cluster A and cluster B are exactly the same as the differences between homosexual and non-homosexual. There's no difference. She hasn't actually changed it. So this doesn't address the issue of autogynephilia at all.
I can think of a trans woman who followed all the cluster A patterns but now dates women, and a trans woman who followed all the cluster B patterns but now exclusively dates men.
This is basically a meaningless observation. What you're seeing is pseudo-bisexualism, which was described by Blanchard, and that is the propensity for an autogynephilic transitioner, trans woman if you like, to become attracted to men for validation. And although this is somewhat more uncommon perhaps in the West, particularly the United States, here nearly all autogynephilic transitioners are androphilic. They have boyfriends. And that is because they live in social circumstances that the society around them expects them to have boyfriends. And so that's what they do. But they may later, get themselves a girlfriend if the opportunity arises. Otherwise, you get what she calls the cluster B, and that's typical pseudo-bisexualism. People who dated women and then suddenly, they decided to date men. It's just a function of validation. You have to understand that for all trans women, all transitioners, validation is massively, massively important. Now, homosexual, transsexuals, former trans kids, transitioned inverts, whatever, they tend to get it from direct experience with men, right? They get it from the love of a man actually loving them and taking care of them and treating them like women. And for them, in responding in a very feminine way towards these men, they will be absolutely submissive in sex. There's no way they would actually penetrate a man. They just wouldn't do it. Well, unless there was some money involved. But they want to. They are women, and they want their lives to reflect that. Whereas autogynephiles are not women, but they want to be women, right? And you'll find quite soon that ContraPoints actually says this herself. Okay.
Blanchard, however, takes homosexual transsexuals and autogynephiles to be two sharply distinct types with two completely different psychosexual motivations to transition.
No, that's a gross misrepresentation of what Blanchard said. And it also misrepresents what's said in the DSM and other diagnostic works. He did not say that this difference existed between homosexual and autogynephilics. What he said was homosexual and non-homosexuals are completely different, and the cause of all non-homosexual gender dysphoria is autogynephilia. So there's a step that she's missed out, that she's not brought into this, right? And the reason she's not brought it into it, or mentioned it, is because it undermines her argument. And she's very careful about not recognizing statements or things that basically do demolish her argument.
What I strongly disagree with, the notion that male homosexual strategy or autogynephilic lust are the primary motivations to transition.
Okay, then what might be the primary motivations for transition? Okay? What are they? No time in this piece does she actually say what her alternative is. She does discuss the old trope of the feminine essence theory, but she says, that's just a folk notion, that's just a folk theory. The fact is, there is no other game in town. Blanchard's typology is correct because there are observably two distinctly different types of male to female transitioner. And they are distinguishable not just by their body types, not just by their morphology, but by their age of transition, the body type, their mannerisms, their natural level of femininity, all of it. They're completely different. You can't mistake one for the other. It can't be done. People who say, some of these autogynephiles, it's nonsense. As soon as you meet them, yeah, and look, don't get me wrong, I live in a place where there are an awful lot of autogynephilic trans women, and some of them are absolutely stunning. I mean, they're drop dead gorgeous, and they're 6'2", for example. It's just not credible. When you see them next to an HSTS, it's like, oh yeah, I got that one figured out. It's not difficult.
Trans women almost universally reject this characterization of their experience.
Here is where ContraPoint slips the first of many misdirections into her piece. She says trans women here. What she actually means is autogynephilic transitioners. That is, non-homosexual transitioners. I have yet to meet or discuss with or encounter online a genuine HSTS who has any problem at all with Blanchard once it's been explained. They go, oh yeah, that's me. That's me. I was always a girl. I was a girl from day one. I was a girl before I was born. I've had these things said to me by many girls over and over again. I was running around with a towel in my head when I was 4. My dad used to do terrible things, beat me up because I just couldn't be the boy he wanted me to be. All of these things. All of them. There's no way that her argument can be right. So what she does is she completely erases HSTS. She just says, no, we're not going to allow them to be considered in this argument. They don't exist. And that is the classic approach of autogynephiles. They know that HSTS, former trans kids, transitioned inverts, call them what you like, completely, their simple existence completely demolishes the notion that, AGPs are something similar to them. It destroys them. So they have to be eradicated. They have to be erased. And that's what they do.
Blanchard has an airtight response to that, namely that trans women who disagree with him are fucking liars.
Which is actually true. They are liars. Autogynephiles habitually misrepresent their own histories. And people have been, including me, by the way, have been very kind about trying to say, well, that's kind of just like a false memory. That, the condition that they have, it's a disorder, by the way. Autogynephilia is a disorder. I don't care what, some bloody quack says about it. It's a disorder. It's a disorder that makes you do things like tell lies about your past and your childhood to make it look more convincing. Right? That's all this is. I wouldn't call them fucking liars, but basically, yeah, they are.
Bailey's telling is that autogynephiles are these unfeminine male masturbators showing up to gender clinics with bogus stories of how they always knew they were women in order to get genital reassignment surgery to satisfy their paraphilia.
The next part of her presentation, ContraPoints goes into full attack mode against J. Michael Bailey, and that's Dr. Michael Bailey. Now, as you know, I'm acquainted with Mike Bailey. I think he's a decent guy. I think he's fair, and I think he doesn't mind quoting controversy, but that doesn't make you a bad person, And the way he was treated by certain members of the autogynephilic activist mob was just totally out of line. It's completely unacceptable. And here is ContraPoints, 15 years later, doing basically the same thing. We have to shoot, we don't like the science, so we have to shoot the scientists. That's basically what's happening here. And again, she will repeat the position that, it upsets me that the science says what it is, so we have to get rid of the science. To excuse the background noises on ContraPoints, and indeed on my part because I've got a road outside. She sounds like she's got somebody digging up the drains outside her. Anyway, one of the problems that often even autogynephiles have, in fact it's maybe not a problem for them, it's maybe just a smokescreen that they use, is that sexual gratification is not necessarily physical. You don't have to masturbate to get sexual affirmation. And so for autogynephiles, things like if you have behavioural autogynephilia, for example, knitting can be sexually rewarding. That might be difficult for someone who's not autogynephilic to understand, but it's there, that's the truth. So it's not just about, sitting in front of a mirror, looking at the image and, pleasuring yourself. Although it is true that we do tend to use that image to try to explain what is actually an incredibly complicated phenomenon. This is not a simplistic thing. It's very, very nuanced and very complex. But in fact, a significant number of autogynephiles don't masturbate. They don't take pleasure from their penises at all. Now at this point, ContraPoints goes into a kind of different presentation where she's kind of acts out as if she was telling her story to a psychoanalyst on a bench.
I was not especially feminine nor especially masculine. I was not interested in sports and was just kind of physically inept. My main childhood interest was music, and I learned several instruments. In early adolescence, I was misdiagnosed with OCD, the primary symptoms being spending too much time in the shower and spending too much time styling my hair. My sexual development was kind of late. I never masturbated till I was 15, and I didn't fantasize about having sex with women or with men, or even about becoming a woman. My fantasies were kind of platonic almost. I would sort of fantasize about women, but in a very abstract kind of way.
Here again, you have something that's very common, commonly reported in AGPs, that they are not particularly feminine children, but they're not particularly masculine either. And that they tend to have been maybe quite solitary, perhaps a little bit insecure and nervous. And there's definitely evidence that where they become strongly masculinized as children, that this might be something of a pushback. It's like an overcompensation. That actually you're kind of booky and, you kind of like sitting in the grass and reading books, playing your guitar, da-dee-da-dee-da, and you don't really want to go and play rugby or American football, whatever that is that they chase an oval ball with. So you kind of overcompensate because your peers, the other boys, are saying, "Oh no, God, don't be a poof." That's what they're saying. Don't be a faggot. Get out there and play the game. Join in. And so I think that to an extent these young boys, they tend to overcompensate, because they don't see themselves as girls. And there's a problem, definitely a problem, which has been largely exacerbated by feminism in the United States, which says that there are certain ways that of being that represent masculinity. And most of them are basically what feminists think masculinity is. And it's got nothing to do with masculinity at all. Anyway, again, late masturbation is commonly reported. It's quite often the case that autogynephilic boys or non-homosexual transitioning boys are somewhat late developers. In fact, here in Asia, they're called late bloomers. And this is why. It's because they don't actually become eroticized until somewhat later. HSTS, they're fully eroticized by the time they're 11. And I mean it, And a lot of them will be sexually active by that time, or 12 years old, that sort of age. And that's it, I'm not saying anything about Western mores about how people should be, but that is the simple truth. AGPs are a bit different that way. Their sexual development comes on later. And it tends to be that, they become eroticized, they start to have erotic feelings, they start to want to pleasure themselves, and very soon after that, bingo, they've got this changed perception of self, right? Which I'll just go into a little bit here, and we'll do more during the course of this, which is going to be quite lengthy. What's happening there is that an erotic target location error is being formed in the young person's mind. And there's a whole load of reasons why this could happen. Quite often, it's because of repressive parents who don't want boys to masculinize, they don't want to masturbate. They tell them it's dirty and naughty to masturbate. That's sort of absolute nonsense. Unfortunately, in the modern world, again, because of feminism, young boys are taught that they mustn't objectify women. Well, that is a ridiculous thing to tell a young boy. Obviously he's going to objectify girls. If he can't objectify girls in order to satisfy himself physically, and yes, I know, not all autogynephiles do this, you know, like just pleasuring themselves. But if he can't erotically target women, who the hell is he going to erotically target? He's a heterosexual boy. You know, it's a ridiculous, an utterly ridiculous thing to do. It's cruel. It's beyond cruel. It's evil, and it's one of the nastiest, most vicious things that feminism has forced on society. This idea that boys can't just look at women and think, "Gosh, you know, she's hot." Doing that to a boy is evil. And what happens is that if you're told that you can't objectify, you can't use as your erotic target, you know, the girl next door, well, what are you going to use? What you'll do is you'll invent something that you can use. And I was having this conversation with someone else earlier. We were talking about the effect of you know, Japanese art, manga, and anime, and it's quite clear that there is a link. Blanchard's discussed this. There is a link between using these products, you know, in adolescence at the point of what's called the sperm arch. That's when boys, the beginning of Tanner stage 4, when boys start to masturbate, when they start to really, you know, they're really eroticized and the hormones are like, wow. And what happens is that instead of fantasizing about women, they're fantasizing about manga characters or anime characters, and they sort of go, you know, I would like to be, that's me, that's what I want to be, because I'm not allowed to fantasize about women, you know. I mean, this is a terrible thing to do, and it's going to cause a great many problems. And boys are taught that the worst thing they could possibly be is be masculine. Well, what do you expect to happen?
There was one period where I cut my hair short and quit that altogether, but it didn't last more than a couple years.
This is a classic binge and purge incident, and as you know if you've been following my work over the last few years, binging and purging is absolutely central to autogynephilia. What will happen is that a person will become, particularly if they're transvestic or you know, so they're going to be buying women's clothes, they'll become really like, you know, I get more clothes, oh yeah, I like that dress, short skirt, looks great, and then suddenly they get a huge guilt feeling, which causes them to say, oh, I have to get rid of all of that, and I have to get, you know, completely jettison all of this stuff that I've built up over the years and go back to being a normal guy. And what's happening here is actually that you have two forms of gender dysphoria going on in the same person. And I know that sounds really like, oh God, how do you do that? But this is how you do it. The host is male, he's a guy, right? And he has male sexuality. He's attracted to women, he wants to penetrate them, you know? And if you have male sexuality, you should have masculine gender, because gender is how you advertise to other people what your sexuality is. You let them know what your preferred way of relating to them is by your presentation. So he has his masculine side, his male side, which should have a masculine personality, a masculine gender, and then he's created, as his erotic target location error, this pseudo-woman, this person who doesn't exist anywhere except inside his head, and she has a completely different set of views on life. She doesn't want to be a man, and if she's forced to appear to be a man, she gets gender dysphoria. So you have this tension, you know, which causes what's called weak self-ideation, in that there's always a struggle between the male part and the female part. And what has to happen for this to be resolved is that one of these has to be destroyed. One of them has to be crushed completely. And successfully transitioned AGPs invariably have totally destroyed one of them. You know, the male side just doesn't exist anymore. It's been crushed, it's been killed.
When I had regular heterosexual sex, it was like my soul had to leave my body in order for me to get the poison out, which is how I thought of it. The cross-dressing was never a solo or a masturbatory activity. There was always a partner, or sometimes several partners.
Soul had to leave my body in order to get the poison out. And again, this is something you'll hear from autogynephilic males, transitioners, often who are not actually transitioned yet, in discussing their relationships, their sexual relationships with their wives. They'll say, well, I had to imagine myself being a lesbian in order to have sex with my wife. But the problem with that was, I was then trying to penetrate her, which is what men do. And so, bingo, cognitive dissonance. And our old friend, the opposed gender dysphorias. And so what will often happen in situations like that is these men just give up sex. They can't cope. They simply can't cope with this level of of cognitive dissonance. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to say that people with autogynephilia, men with autogynephilia, are like sick or something like that. But it's a disorder. It is a damn disorder. Saying it's not a disorder is like, your car rolls into the garage and you say to the mechanic, there's something wrong with the car. And he looks at you and says, well, it's got no petrol in it. And you go, yeah, but that's not the problem. No, that's not the problem. It's ridiculous. Yes, of course it's a bloody disorder. That's not a stigma. It just means that you have to recognize it as such. You have to deal with it. You either have to manage it. Well, in fact, there is no choice. For an autogynephile, there is no evidence that anything can actually get rid of it. You just have to manage it. And there are lots of different ways of managing it. For some men, management will be transition. But they're still autogynephilic males. Even if they're the ill feelings they've got, the gender dysphoria goes down, they're still, if they went back to being men, it goes straight back up again. The condition has not been cured. It has not gone away. You're just managing it.
What I liked about it was the way that dressing like a woman changed the way partners interacted with my body, how they would kind of treat me like a woman. I fully acknowledge that a lot of the feminization was pretty fetishistic. There was a lot of short dresses and thigh highs, and occasionally also a BDSM submissive aspect. But over time I realized that the fetish aspect wasn't really what I liked about it. It wasn't humiliating for me to be feminized, it was affirming. And one day I kind of realized that I didn't want to be feminized at all. I wanted to be feminine.
I wanted to be feminine. I wanted to be a woman. Okay? No transition sexual invert male, HSTS, former trans kid, would ever even think about saying that. They know how feminine they are. They can't fight their femininity. They can't live, they're so feminine, they can't live as men. It's not a question of what they want, it's a question of what they have to be, what they actually are. And in those few words, ContraPoints absolutely defined the difference between AGPs like her and HSTS. She wants to be a woman. HSTS are women.
In my mid-20s, I first started really paying attention to trans women and thinking about transitioning myself, but I thought that since I didn't feel like a woman, that I never would, and I thought that I would never pass and that I would just be a hideous parody of womanhood.
Yet again, there's no HSTS on this planet, not one, who did not fully accept that she was a girl by the age of 4, or maybe 5 or 6, around about then. The idea that they didn't, that ContraPoints, when she says, I didn't feel like a woman, that says it all. That's all you need to know. What you have here is a situation where you've got a person who is absolutely conforms to a particular description, who then says, but I'm not that. That's not me. Oh no. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's like you walked up, sorry, wait a minute, come in, Sam, please. Being joined for a moment by Sam, the lovely Sam. Come and show yourself to the people. Here she is. I don't know what she's doing. She's mucking about because we're moving house, so she's very busy just now getting things sorted out. And this is my lovely wife, Sam, who's busy spraying WD-40 on my head in the hopes that it'll make my brain work better, I suppose. How are you doing, darling?
I'm not okay.
Why are you not okay, darling?
Because
you're so beautiful?
No. Because.
You're still a virgin?
No.
No?
Because. Hello people, how are you there?
I get this all the time. You are delightful, my darling.
So what are you doing on?
I'm making a video.
You're making video for what? For autophilia or?
Yes, it is about autogynephilia.
What is the problem up there?
It's a response.
Another problem?
It's a response to a person called ContraPoints, who says that who's an autogynephilic transitioner who says that autogynephilia doesn't exist. It's like,
It exists, everything exists, but it's the modern right now. It's the difference is a modern.
okay.
But
Well,
like that example, the life of decade before, like that, we cooking, diba? If ever you, no changing, but the changing is a modern base, in the modern base. But before is not a decade base now is a modern base, so that's what is the problem. Everything exists except of dinosaur.
Okay. There are no dinosaurs, and Sam is,
As long as still,
Sam is Aswang, yes.
as long as that still exists, diba?
Okay.
So that's all no grandparents like saying that, oh, the Abaswang over there like that, oh, be careful, like, but it still exists, like a bad boy, fat man, slim boy, diba? Like you, but an ugly and woman, it still exists. But the difference is the modern. It's a modern life.
I
That's
absolutely
the
adore
problem.
this woman. I
So
got to tell you,
people
I
is-
just love it a bit.
Why, if ever the problem, if ever what the problem, example, if you like to go be there like a changing being a man, you're a man, but autophilia is like a wearing clothes because you must being a girl herself, himself, being herself, and after that, will be okay. So why? Just enjoy as long you're never hurting other people, why not?
What she's basically saying is you just manage it and get on with life and you'll be okay.
Oh, just follow your heart because when you die, it's not happy, that's the problem.
Okay.
At least you're dying, you're doing your happiness. And you're free and freedom. Thank you, that's all, thank you, bye bye.
Always looked a little bit younger than my age, but last year I also started noticing the first signs that I was going to age into the body of an older man, and that triggered really intense gender dysphoria.
That is a very interesting point, and it's not the first time I've heard it. It seems that in the West, certainly, you know, because in the West there's this real fixation on youth, you know, and on neoteny, on being youthful, in a way which there really wasn't even 20 or 25 years ago. And there certainly have been cases I've come across, similar to this one, where the trigger that brought on the autogynephilia, or what we might call the clinical autogynephilia, where it was actually evident to everybody else that there's something going on, was aging. That they got a little bit older and they went, I don't like what I'm becoming. I don't like the fact that I'm becoming an older man. Well, you know something, nobody likes getting old. I don't like getting old. But you have to accept it. It's just part of life. Death is part of life. Aging is part of life. And it's difficult perhaps in a culture which so absolutely vaunts, you know, youthfulness and youthful beauty, but it's not. It's ephemeral. It has to pass, and you have to be aware that it is going to pass you. And the fact is that succumbing to autogynephilic pressure is not going to help. You will still age, as Amanda, who used to be quite a common commenter on our site. As Amanda said, you know, the thing is that it doesn't change anything. All that happens is in 30 years you're an old trans woman. You know, it doesn't stop you getting old.
I live as a woman full-time now, and most of the changes aren't sexual, but the hormones certainly do have sexual effects. I now find myself attracted to both women and men, and the mere visual image of a woman no longer turns me on the way it did. Instead, I need there to be a certain kind of interpersonal connection.
The effect of hormones in that they do tend to moderate the way that a person feels sexually is really well documented, and it would be actually surprising if it were not the case. You know, what you have to understand is that testosterone is really, really, really powerful. You know, it's a really devastatingly powerful hormone. And when you take that down, then all the things that men also are, you know, which is empathetic and loving and enjoying interpersonal relationships, they come up, you know, because you're much less fixated on the simple fact of, you know, the chase and the penetration. It's a fact. I mean, actually, fatherhood does very much the same things for you. You start to change from being, you know, I'm a sexual predator. I want to, you know, get as many women as I can, and then suddenly you have to look after children, and you start loving children and being like, you know, they're wonderful, and understanding the empathy and the needs that a child has. And it's just because you're in a way, you know, your testosterone is being controlled. I have not seen any studies on this, but it's quite possible that in situations like that, men's testosterone actually goes down. Don't know. Possible thought. Somebody do some research on that one. But what ContraPoints is saying here is not uncommon. You know, that does happen.
Please fuck me. I guess the critical thing is that I've been wearing women's clothes, my clothes, for 7 consecutive months, and I have been turned on by it for 0% of the time. So the idea that I'm some kind of transvestic fetishist is ridiculous. And I'm not turned on by the mere idea of having a female body either. I mean, when there's developments, I'll check it out, but I'm not like, oh yeah, I have tits now, that's so hot. I mean, it's kind of hot.
Not all autogynephilics are transvestic, but in fact, ContraPoints is presenting as a woman wearing women's clothes. So there is an element of transvestism inside her makeup. Remember that in the DSM, transvestic fetishism is dealt with separately from autogynephilia, or what they call, you know, late and adolescent, early and adolescent onset gender dysphorias. It's seen as a separate paraphilia. So it's not right of her to try to conflate these in a kind of straw man way that she does, which is to say, well, you know, I'm not a fetishist, a clothing fetishist, therefore I don't have autogynephilia. No, that doesn't follow. It's her basically saying, you know, I don't have anatomical autogynephilia, but, you know, I quite like it when my tits grow. I mean, you know, you can't say one thing and mean another like that. That's just ridiculous. You know, there's no consistency here. I would suggest that you have, ContraPoints has, both transvestic and anatomical autogynephilia, and also probably some behavioural. They're commonly mixed together. They're not exclusive in any way at all. You can have all 5 different forms. You know, it's not a case of saying, well, I don't have this, so therefore I'm not that. That just doesn't work.
The sexual aspect of my transsexuality is not about the target of lust being directed inward. It's about me wanting my sexual encounters to occur from the standpoint of a female body, or, you know, at least as close as I can get. And since I started hormones, it's about my sexual desires coming from this psychologically female place of vague bisexual interest activated by interpersonal connection, rather than intense object-oriented male lust.
Here's the question, you know, I might barely put it. This is slightly different form, but it's basically the same thing. Coming from this psychologically female place, how would you know what that was? How could you possibly know what that was? You're male. How could you do that? That's not possible. You can't see inside somebody else's mind. You can't know what it is to be someone else. You can't know what it is to feel. You know? That what someone else feels like. You can certainly be empathetic. It's not the same thing. And I'm afraid this particular line of argument is ridiculous. No, it's not. It's what you think might be a female place. It's not actually a female place. After I had done those bits, which were quite interesting, because I liked actually the way that she had done that sort of done it as if she was exposing herself or expounding to a psychoanalyst. I want to do things a little more quickly, so I'll just pick up on some points that she made. She said that she wanted to be feminine. Absolutely, that's what autogynephiles do. HSTS just want to be gorgeous. They know they're feminine. They're already feminine. They're so feminine, they can't live as men. They just want to be better, or more good-looking, more beautiful, and more attractive than all the other women. Just like every other woman. She then, in the video, which I'm not going to go into this bit, picks up on a thing called autophilia. Now, autophilia is basically love of the self, and it's the term from which Blanchard concocted autogynephilia, because autophilia is love of the self, autogynephilia is love of the self as a woman. Now, you can't say that the fact that autophilia exists, which it does, in any way takes away or destroys the notion that autogynephilia exists. You know, the autogynephilia is a subset of autophilia. Okay, one does not negate the other. And then she goes on to talk about lingerie, and she gets into this ridiculous thing that Moser did. The fact is that most women like wearing sexy lingerie. There's a huge difference between a woman feeling, that's nice, because she's wearing nice knickers, and a man doing it. I mean, if you can't see that, then you really need to go back to school. Autogynephiles are not women. They're heterosexual males. So here is what's happening. The women who do that, who enjoy Victoria's Secret underwear, and more power to them, they don't have an ETLE because they actually are women. They actually are female. Okay? This is just not a reasonable argument. And Moser, I've seen this again. There's other people around who do this, and it's just complete nonsense. They'll say, well, they'll take behaviours that might indicate autogynephilia in a male, and they'll ask a woman if she does that, and the woman goes, well, yes, sometimes. And they go, women, that means women have got autogynephilia. Absolute nonsense. It's complete nonsense. If there's no ETLE, there is no autogynephilia. It's as simple as that. You need the ETLE to be autogynephilic, right? And women looking at themselves in the mirror and thinking how cute they are, or thinking maybe I might need to get these wrinkles sorted out. They're not autogynephilic. They're just being women. And by the way, the same applies to men. Me looking at the mirror and going, oh, I kind of prefer myself with a beard, I mean, what is that? Is that autoandrophilia? Of course not. It's just me being a little bit narcissistic. It's just normal. Everybody's a bit narcissistic. Otherwise, you'd go out like a slob every day. I mean, come on, people. Then ContraPoints makes his point about women during sex touching their own breasts and suggests that, a woman touching her breasts is being autogynephilic. That is ridiculous. That's beyond ridiculous. The woman is touching her own breast during sex because it feels good. She's not trying to reaffirm some imaginary woman in her head. She bloody is a woman. Essentially, according to Freud, and I believe Freud in this, I'm completely clear about this, at its absolute most basic level, right? Now, there are many other levels above that, but at its most basic level, female sexuality is the desire to be sexually receptive to a man, okay? And what women do in order to make themselves more sexually attractive to men in order that they can perform that role, it's not autogynephilia. It's just being a woman. And the same in inverse happens with men. It's just that simple. And then she talks about changes in sexual arousal with hormones, which we've discussed a little bit. And there's a paper I've mentioned to myself here, which is by Nguyen et alia, 2018, and I'll put a link to it. And it's the changes which are noted by autogynephiles on taking hormones, that the precise nature of their sexual attraction and orientation changes a little bit. These are mentioned by AGPs. They're never mentioned by HSTS, not ever. And the reason is that HSTS are already feminine. They already have female sexuality. You take the testosterone away from them, and it's just the same but more so. Whereas for an autogynephile, it changes completely because all of the bits that are being suppressed by the testosterone are taken away, and the other bits come up. She then criticises Blanchard's study because it didn't have a control group. Blanchard simply noted the details of a group of people who were sent to him because they desired to have genital reconstruction surgery. They desired to transition. This was not a randomized sample. No, you can't just say, you should have added in some. Women don't go to a clinic to ask for surgery to turn them into women. I mean, for goodness sake, try and have some logic about this. Having said that, Blanchard has been, if somewhat grudgingly, confirmed in studies by Larry Nuttbrock, Bochting et alia, who in papers released in 2009, 2010, 2011, I believe they're still working on it. He says basically there are issues to do with Blanchard that would reflect social differences and pressure from the society around them, with which I completely agree, by the way. AGP here in Southeast Asia, it's not the same as AGP in New York or London, but it's still AGP. You mentioned Charles Moser. I've discussed this already. Moser is a fraud. He doesn't understand what he's talking about. He doesn't understand the ETLE. If you don't have an ETLE, you don't have AGP. All right? It's as simple as that. Women can't have AGP because they don't get an ETLE on themselves as a sexually attractive woman because they are already sexually attractive women. I mean, for goodness sake. And cis women's attraction to men is both affirmative, you know, they attract a man that tells you you're beautiful, but it's also lustful. They have the same attraction to men's bodies that HSTS have. What about that? They want to be penetrated. And I'm sorry, feminists, I don't have any time for you. I realise you don't have any time for me. Too bad. Consistently uses the term trans women when what she actually means is autogynephilic transitioners, completely erases the HST experience, doesn't want to hear about it, doesn't want to know about them, doesn't want to quote what they say, because doing that would completely demolish her whole premise. Because the HSTS actually are the women in men's bodies, or rather in male bodies. And then she goes on to talk about some sites that try to support her point of view, particularly the notorious Cross-Dreamer site run by Jack Molay, who is an awful, awful person. An AGP in complete denial. I mean, he has occasionally pestered us on this channel, but he's not been around for a couple of years. I think he realises he ain't going to get anywhere. And he can do that horrible slimy thing that he does as much as he like. I'm not wearing it. And when then again, she talks about the trans community. When she says the trans community, what she means is the AGP community. Because HSTS don't take part, largely, in the so-called trans community. They're not part of LGBT. They just don't have anything to do with it. They avoid it like the plague, and so they should. Even trans women who accept being AGP state that the cross-sex arousal and fantasy diminish when they start taking hormones. And yes, that's what I expect. The testosterone is down, so the AGP feelings diminish. We know this. This actually proves that AGP is real. It's not the other way around. She goes on to say worse things, which is that Blanchard and Bailey are attempting to humiliate AGPs. I think that's a completely malicious reading of their work. They don't. They simply attempt to understand it. And I'm the same. I mean, I'm very keen to help AGPs in any way that I can. But the first thing to do is to recognise that you have autogynephilia. And then you can plan your life. Then you can say, well, okay, what am I going to do to try and, you know, have a decent life working around this, right? Denial gets you nowhere. Denial is always a failure. And then my overall conclusions on the piece were that, well, to start with, ContraPoints is an obvious AGP. I mean, she looks like an AGP. If you've seen this, you've watched what she said herself, her own words, identified exactly as an AGP. And she's basically the cow standing on the hill saying, I'm not a cow. It's absolutely ridiculous. You have to accept what you are in life, you know? And if you don't do that, then nothing is going to work for you. You know, you can't run around saying, oh gosh, you know, I'm not really this, I'm not really that, because it doesn't suit you. You know, it doesn't work like that. If you wish for the rest of us to try to sympathise and help you, sympathise with and help you, well, you know, you have to go along with it. And unfortunately, with AGPs, and this is something, by the way, that ContraPoints exhibits right the way through this video, she exhibits flashes of narcissistic rage, something which she says doesn't exist. Of course it does exist, and she exhibits it. It's another case where there's a cow that isn't a cow. But then look at GameStop Boy. I mean, what is that? That's narcissistic rage. Look at what the three harpies did to Mike Billy. It's narcissistic rage. You can't get around it. You know, something that absolutely exactly fits the description you're giving to it. You can't then say, well, no, it's not really that. You know? Oh, it's something else. And you say, well, it looks like that. Listen, if it looks like a duck, it talks like a duck. Talking duck, talks like a duck, and it walks like a duck. It's a duck. My role is not to put down autogynephiles. It's not to make them feel bad. I certainly not. You know, I have enormous sympathy for them. And I particularly have sympathy for those men who don't wish to transition, but they still have autogynephilia. And for these people, it can be, it's a disorder. And if the dysphoria becomes really debilitating, it can be life destroying. It can be life destroying. I mean, people who are denying autogynephilia are in themselves, when they are obviously autogynephilic, I think that they damage themselves more than anyone else. Because in order to manage this thing, in order to try and make a life that works around it, your first step must be recognition. It must be acceptance and say, yeah, that's me, and what am I going to do about it? How am I going to have something that passes for a decent, civilized, normal life with this condition? And I'm not saying you should, repress it or suppress it or anything like that at all. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you should recognize it and then establish a way in which you can deal with it. Now, for some people, that will be transition, but it's not for everybody. And you have to kind of try really hard to accept that you have a condition. I mean, I think that autogynephilia is something that all men have a propensity to have, because it uses the normal male erotic target location system. It just moves it onto something different, where it possibly shouldn't be. But once that's been established, because sex is such a rewarding thing, then it's stuck. You kind of have to live with it, and having to live with it means managing it, but it also means accepting it. And so spending hours online saying, look at all this stuff, and exhibiting all the classic signs of autogynephilia, but hey, autogynephilia doesn't really exist. It's ludicrous. It's like you went up a hill and there was a cow there, black and white and big horns, and a big udder swinging a boot and tail flapping the flies off, and you said, "Hi, are you a cow?" And the cow looks at you and says, "Nah, I'm a duck." It's ridiculous. It's just nuts, And in fact, in a way, it's slightly worse, because it's as if you walked up to that cow and said, "Are you a cow?" And the cow goes, "Nah, I'm not a cow." And then you went, "Well, what actually are you?" And the cow goes, "I don't know what I am, but I know I'm not a cow." This doesn't work, people. You've got to get a grip.